Welcome back. Now, this is a moment we're all lucky to share. We're about to revisit a rare and unforgettable conversation with Marcia Lucas, an Oscar-winning editor whose work shaped Star Wars, American Graffiti, and Martin Scorsese's Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Moderated by film historian Bobbie Osteen, this discussion takes us inside the creative mind of a true legend. Opportunities like this don't come around often, so settle in and enjoy this once-in-a-lifetime conversation.
Marcia Lucas, where are you?
I forgot how funny that movie was. I did.
What was it like for you to see it again after all these years?
No, I have to apologize. This print was in such bad shape. The sound and all the dirt and scratches on the prints, yeah. But I think that it's going to get restored. Yeah, I mean,
see, this is one of the things after reading your interviews. We just met today, but one of the things I love about you is you're very much a straight shooter, and the fact that you said that. And I also love that you so embrace your gifts as an editor. I wish more editors did that. You always said you were a born editor and that you are very good at it. And I think it's wonderful because a lot of editors don't embrace their talents the way you do, and you always were that way. And my name is Bobbie Osteen. I'm a film historian, and my purpose in my work is to celebrate editing, and which I think will never get the full appreciation it deserves. They are the unsung heroes of the filmmaking team, and I can't think of a better example of that than you, Marcia Lucas.
Oh, thank you.
And just to pull back for a moment, your role as a female voice at a very pivotal time in film history in the late 60s and early 70s when a group of young men were incredibly talented, visionary young men, changed the cinema history and culture, and that you were a female voice in that group, that boys club. And it's incredibly significant. And I appreciate you for that so much. And thematic to that is this particular film, because this was the first time Martin Scorsese had just made Mean Streets, which is the antithesis of this in terms of a male voice or a male point of view and a female point of view. And Ellen Burstyn had the power. She had just done The Exorcist. She found a book she loved, but she didn't want to do a cliched woman's story. She appreciated the grit of his film, but they had a meeting, and John Calley, who was the executive producer at Warner's, was there, and he was basically being auditioned. It was his first studio film, and she said to him, "What do you know about women?" And he said, "Nothing, but I'd like to learn." So, but I just talked to you briefly outside the theater, and you were saying what your theory on why you got hired for this film.
Well, I think I got. Can you hear me? Okay, I have to go on. Well, I met George. I was an assistant film editor working in commercials, television commercials. When I met George Lucas, was a film student, and we got to know a lot of film students. And one of the film students we got to meet was Marty Scorsese, because George had gotten this it was a job to work at Warner Brothers for 6 months, and he was on the studio lot, and they said, "What do you want to do, kid?" And he said, "Oh, good." They said, "Go observe production." So he went in, and they were editing the Woodstock movie, and Marty Scorsese was one of the editors on the Woodstock movie. And so George went in and said hi, and they met. And then I got to know Marty and Brian De Palma and this kind of New York group, and they shared all of our Bay Area and Los Angeles friends. And then George was, I worked as an assistant editor on several films, and I edited a little documentary once that I was working in commercials, and a commercial director came to me and said, Marcia, I'm making a little documentary, would you edit it? And I said, sure. He said, 16 millimeter. I said, fine, I'll work on it. I'm happy to do it. I'll ask my boss if we can get a cutting room at night. And they said, sure. And I cut this little film. It was called John Steinbeck Writer, or Writer John Steinbeck. It was sort of about 20 minutes. And the director had never had a chance to interview John Steinbeck because he had passed away while I was making the film. But I cut the film, and very shortly after that, I'd been married to George, and we moved up to the Bay Area, and I was watching the Oscars that year, which I always watched, and there was a short film documentaries. Guess what one of the short film documentaries was nominated? And you could have knocked me off my chair because I had no idea. I didn't know. So I said, I think I know what I'm doing. I think I'm good at this. So long story short, we moved to Bay Area, so we were living out in Marin County. And George got to be really close with Francis Coppola. Actually, when he was at Warner Brothers, you walked into Francis's set because Francis was shooting a film called Phineas Rainbow. And Francis saw George over there hanging out, and he said, hey, kid, what are you doing here? He said, well, I'm a film student, and I'm here, and I'm supposed to observe production. And Francis said, oh, okay, well, what's your name? And I'll give you a job. He said, you know, I half like you, kid, because you got half a beard. Because Francis had a full beard, and George had a half a beard. And then he said, I'll give you a job. Come in every day and give me a note on camera angle, how I should shoot the scene. So they became very close friends. And that's how George got to make his first movie, THX 1138. Well, I was an assistant to George on that film. Then I was an assistant on some other movies that were shot in the Bay Area. And then he was going to make American Graffiti. And then he wanted to hire Verna Fields, because Verna had done Jaws for Steven Spielberg. And we were really good friends with Steven too, you know. And so I said to George, I said, Verna do a great job, she's great, see if she'll do it. She has to, you know, come to Mill Valley. And he said, not a problem. I said, but the day you finish shooting, you got to let me start cutting. I'm the best assistant there is. I'll do the job for Verna, but the day you stop filming, you have to let me start cutting because the film won't be finished being cut. And in the meantime, Verna had found out that she had a previous obligation to edit a movie for Peter Bogdanovich in Italy. So I got to start editing, and I started to work on that film, which I basically finished. And then George and I almost got divorced because I recut the whole movie. Structurally, it went from A, B, C, D, because it's 4 guys at night, right? Anyway, he kept cutting away before a scene was quite finished, you know. I said, no, we got to have a scene has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We have to kind of understand the characters before we cut away. He said, no, yada, yada, I have to be like the script. I finally said, George, give me 24 hours. I can restructure the movie, I can recut all the scenes, I can assemble what I want to assemble and put them together, and then we'll screen it. Well, guess what? American Graffiti you see in the movie today is Marcia's cut.
Can you also talk about what you did to the songs? With the songs, you had the same issue where they were choppy.
We were laying in the music. American Graffiti's wall-to-wall music, source music from the Cars and everything. And we were laying in the music, and we went to do a cut. We went to view a cut of the film with music. And George had laid in songs, and then when the song ended and the scene ended, he just cut it off. I was sitting there watching the movie, trying to figure out if the cuts were working, if transitions were working, if the performance was good, all those editorial things. And all of a sudden, this music would stop and another song would start. I said, George, you can't do that. Well, long story short, Jordan ended up respecting me enough to bring me in on Star Wars. And Marty, of course, knew I'd cut American Graffiti for George. And because George was a filmmaker and Marty was a filmmaker, and they hated the studio system, he thought because I had cut a successful film, a box office hit, he could get me on his film at Warner Brothers because it was his first studio picture. And that's how I ended up cutting Alice. Yeah.
And you said he was afraid that he'd get some fuddy-duddy or a spy.
Well, yes, there was a rumor on studio about Warner Brothers that Jack Warner was so, obsessed with being in control of everything that he had a guy who he put in charge of post-production who became a spy for all the films in post-production, the editing and the editors, and he'd go to all the screenings and report back to Jack Warner. So Marty was really worried about that. But because I cut this hit movie, they said, okay, she can do it. And I did. And it was a great film, but I tell you, we were editing, we would sit down and you watch your first cut. Do we have time? We watch your first cut, and the first cut of a film is usually pretty long because you've got everything in there, soup to nuts. And the film was very long, and then we decided we needed to lose. We took 5 or 6 minutes out of the beginning of the film, which was more the father and more the son and more of the fighting and the first dinner scene was great. The second dinner scene was great. The bed night scene was great. We were like, he's got to die. They got to hit the road because the movie starts when they hit the road. And so we lost a lot of film there. And towards the end of Alice, there was a lot that went on between Alice and Flo before the Chris Christopherson character really came in and became a character in the movie. And was watching it and watching it and watching it. And the movie I was getting so bored and the movie was dying. I said, we got to get Chris in here earlier. And Marty said, I agree, let's do that. And I said, well, we've got plenty of footage we can cut around, her and what the waitress, Vera, not liking it. Vera was humor. And so we cut around it and made it work. And then, it's kind of a lot funnier movie than I thought it was. It's pretty funny. Gets a lot of laughs. The boy was great. Ellen was great. How about Harvey Keitel? Was he scary? Oh, my God. And Marty would laugh when I'd be cutting the scene. He'd be laughing. He'd say, oh, that's great. You got to use that. And you'll all notice, too, that he moves the camera a lot. Yeah, Marty liked to really move the camera a lot when you're shooting. So he's tracking people with the camera and everything.
So, by the way, he said the fuddy-duddies at Warner's, that were the old-timers, I should say, that were watching the dailies, said, he's moving the camera all the time. How is the editor going to cut that? And was that a challenge for you?
Well, I thought about it when I took the job because I knew Marty liked to move the camera. And I thought, I wonder if this is going to cut. So anyway, yeah, the cutting was not a problem at all. When they were filming in Tucson, we were in a motel, and we were running the dailies at night in one of the motel rooms. I was set up to edit in one of the other hotel rooms, and then Marty would come in and run the cuts I was making, the rough cuts, the first cuts. Anyway, he loved everything I did. He was not critical at all, and I said, this is going to work, because it was dinner scene, with that was one of the first things they shot, was the husband and Tucson.
But what's also really significant, Marcia, is he said you were the first editor that he let cut his movie. Previous to that, he never let an editor cut his movies. Mm-mm. So how did that evolve? Like when you had your first meeting, did you right away realize that he was going to let you, or did you have to earn his trust, or how did that evolve?
Well, I read the script, so I knew what I was dealing with the script. And I thought, this is good story. I loved the characters. I liked the script. I was really, really happy to. And of course, George, because I was going to be on location and working in Los Angeles, George wasn't the happiest camper, but I commuted to LA on Monday mornings, went to Warner Brothers, and went back to George on weekends. But then George got so bored being at home, he actually came to Tucson and stayed in my motel room, and he was writing the script for Star Wars. He wrote for 4 years. Yeah, it kept, making a lot of changes, and it really evolved a lot. But when I was cutting, when Marty was shooting, and I was running the cuts, it was a happy camper. So I thought, I do know what I'm doing. All of it, you always feel challenged, and the challenge is good. And I was always very honest with my directors, totally honest, like I explained with George. This movie doesn't work. I don't get it. Why doesn't it work?
But
And with Marty was so funny. I mean, he just, that scene with Harvey Keitel, I'll never forget when he did it all in the camera where he's, let me in, he's like, he finally breaks the glass and he rushes in, and he goes and he gets his wife, and that's all one camera move. He pulls her out and everything, and Marty was laughing his head off. Marty would sit there and laugh his head off. When I got Taxi Driver, there's a big bloody scene at the end of the movie, the climactic bloody scene at the end of the movie, and I was working on the character going in and shooting the pimp at the top of the stairs, and he shoots his hand or something, and there's blood squirting all over the place, and I would say, well, this is a good take, and Marty would say, I got a much better take with a lot more blood. Oh, he is a character. Yeah, he's a really funny guy. I know this scene with Harvey Keitel is so great because when he finally leaves and he walks over to her and says, see you tonight, right? And she's like, and, and then she goes, right, and he finally leaves and everything, and then I said, and then Marty says, cut, we're cutting you, we're jumping on a suitcase. I said, absolutely, we gotta do that. So I enjoy editing. Editing's my favorite part. I like to read a script if I'm gonna be the editor. And then beyond that, production is so involved with so many, it's an army, of people. But when you end up with, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of feet of film you have, and you're going to have a 2-hour movie, so you're going to have 12 reels of film, and you start with a lot, it's a joy to bring the pieces together to make it work. It's joyful to me. I love doing it. And I love like, looking at the dailies and going, this performance is great. I have to use that close-up. It's so genuine, So I think I had a gift for it.
And Marcia, the way you capture all the raw emotions and just the complexities of, particularly like the scene where the two of them are in the bathroom, and also intercutting with the chaos in the diner. But I know they shot that whole scene and then did it again because Diane Lane came to Marty and he said, she talked with Ellis Burstyn and they had an idea and they did it again. Can you talk about putting that scene together? Because it's amazing.
Well, I know we had the dailies from the first scene. And then I remember Marty told me, he said, I got to reshoot that scene. So he reshot the scene and we got all the new dailies, and then I had all the new footage to work with. And so it was pretty obvious that it was a pretty intense scene, and it was pretty obvious you needed the comic relief. So exactly getting the cuts inside to the motel to the restaurant, it worked so good, was funny. Light. That film has a lot of light moments when you start to get maybe too emotional. She cries a lot, and she's upset a lot. And you have to keep it moving. My theory of movies is if you get confused and bored, you get up and go to the bathroom. Or if you get really, don't understand what's going on. I have bugaboos about what some editors do, but that I would never do, but that's just me.
But also tonally and mood-wise, there's a lot of shifts from and it's you have to be very dexterous how to go from comedy to incredibly intense emotion, and you do that so beautifully, and that must have been a challenge.
Well, there was a lot of scenes reduced and cut down from the very first cut, because movies evolve, first cut, second cut, final cut.
It was like 3 hours and 16 minutes.
It could have been the first cut. The first cut was pretty long.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're always compressing the scene. And you always have to have the exposition. What's the scene doing? What's it telling in the story? And what's it doing for the character development? And that's the heart of the scene. And you always have to have the heart of the scene. Maury likes to improvise. So a lot of the improvisation that he does doesn't end up in a movie because he makes such long movies. Now, I haven't seen Marty for years because he's on the East Coast. But some of his movies he's known now for having very long movies.
Yeah, he might need you again.
Yeah.
Give you a call.
Shh, don't tell him.
Oh, but it's this other funny thing that I don't know if this is going to surprise you, But the scene that he pointed out, that he said you did such a brilliant job with, and he didn't touch it. He just thought it was perfect. I don't know if you're going to guess what I'm going to say. It's not obvious. The Greg gorilla scene in the car. He said what Marcia did with that scene, he said that scene is more me than anything in the movie. Does that make sense to you? That
I
he
guess
said
it
that?
does. I guess it does. Yes, because it's a great story, and she just never gets it. He keeps going on and on and on, and she doesn't get it.
So what actually happened in real life is Alfred Lutter, the boy, who was very much in real life like he is in the movie. So he would rode to work one day with Marty, and all Marty wanted to do, I think it was like an hour drive or whatever, all he wanted to do was prep for the day's shoot. And this kid would just keep telling that joke. And he didn't get it. Don't you get it? Don't you get it? So that was, but it's just so funny to me that scene was what he said. Oh, Marcia, what
This speaks to Marty's brilliance, because you realize that it would be great in the movie. That would really work for the road trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I that scene also that I love so much in the kitchen, I guess that was where she and Chris Christopherson, and she's talking about why she wanted to be a performer, and they're drinking, and well, was that a challenging scene to cut, because it seems like that could have gone on, and you had to shape that.
Well, it probably was reduced in some form. Matter of fact, it must have been cut, because I noticed tonight that there were a couple bad cuts in that scene, and I went, wait a minute, he's holding the glass in that shut, and now I'm on, and he's not got the glass in his hand. So I must have done some tricky cutting in there, yeah.
But when there was all that improv, I know they rehearsed, and then they improved, and then the screenwriter sort of integrated the improv, and he said it was a combination of being very freeform and a sort of a combination of being structured and freeform. And I just wondered, when you were watching dailies together, did he give you any input, or did he kind of leave you on your own in terms of making choices? Since, as you said, it was very long sometimes, and maybe somewhat formless.
Well, yeah, but first cuts are loose. They just
Right.
are. They're the nature of the film, because you have so many takes. In a normal scene, you have 5 different camera angles, and you got 2 or 3 takes on every camera all printed. So you got all this film. So when I would go into the screening room to look at dailies, like with Marty, I would have a list of all the scene numbers and the take numbers. And then we'd watch them, and Marty'd say, look at this is good, but the next take's the one to use. And I would immediately write down, make a check by that. So you're constantly, listening to the director, sort of. I think I was liked by my directors because I was always honest. I was always honest with them.
I think it's very obvious, don't you guys think? No, but it's wonderful.
But I was very diplomatic. I was always diplomatic.
You said you've always had wonderful relationships with your directors. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I've had good staff. I've had good editors. We had to bring in 2 editors on Taxi. We brought in editors on Star Wars, because the studios always want the film yesterday, and you're struggling to get a fine cut. And so you bring in extra staff, and the editors are great. And to this day, when Marty shot the Taxi Drivers, do you know about the Taxi Driver scene? Oh, when Bobbie De Niro is doing the mirror, and he's pulling out the gun and saying, you talking to me, that scene? Well, Marty shot a whole reel, a whole 10 minutes of Bobbie improvising the scene. So there were all these reels of takes for the movie, and I was working on some other scenes, and so I said to Marty, let's give that to Tom. And then, so Tom said, sure, I'll cut that, and the assistants gave him all the film. And then we went and said, hi, Tom, we'll see you next week. This was a hoot, giving him all this film. A day and a half later, Marty came in the cutting room, and he went in to watch Tom's cut. Never touched a frame of it. Never touched one frame of Tom's cut. I was really lucky that I had good editors, too, that I worked with. I was really a team player. Yeah.
So I want to circle back to what I originally said about what a significant role you played as a female voice in this group of filmmakers, the Boys Club.
The Boys Club.
Or they call them, Pauline Kael called them the movie brats.
Oh, the movie brats.
So would you mind telling the story of the Raiders of the Lost Ark screening?
Oh,
Because I think this story epitomizes not only how honest you are, but how important your voice was to this group of young men who may have been a bit clueless at times and needed sort of the emotional insights of someone like you.
well, okay, here's the story. I'll make it brief. Do we have time?
And then we will open up to questions because
Okay.
I'm sure
Yeah, we're going to
people
run
will-
out of time, but
No,
yes.
we have some time.
Oh, we do? Okay, good.
I've got a cue here.
Okay, good. Well, we were on location a couple times when they were shooting Indiana Jones and the Lost Ark in Africa, and I saw a few dailies, but wasn't thinking about it. I didn't work on the film. Well, I was trying to have a baby, and I wasn't gonna be back in the cutting room 12 hours a day, so I didn't see the film, and then I think that Stephen had a lock on the picture. I'd read the script, great script, and and Stephen had a lock on the picture. He had a fine cut. And he was bringing it up to show to George in San Anselmo. Our home in San Anselmo, we had a screening room, a small screening room. And so we were running the film, and Stephen was there, and I think Brian De Palma was there, and I don't think Margie was there, but there were some other Bay Area filmmakers there, and just watching this movie. And when the movie was over, it was such a brilliant, wonderful, fabulous film. But when the movie was over, I said, what happened to the end scene where he comes out of the federal building after the government tells him they're taking care of it? In the script, he came out of the federal building. Marion was waiting for him on the stairs, and he goes over to her, and they start walking down the stairs, and she says, let's go get a drink, glug, glug, and they kind of walk off down the street. I said, what happened to that scene? Because it went from the federal building, guy, saying the government's taking care of it, to all of a sudden that giant warehouse where they're nailing the cart. I said, you left Marion on the pole, stuck on the pole, in the cave, where all the Nazis got killed, and she was tied on the stick with Harrison, and you were never going to see her again in the movie. I said, why didn't you shoot that movie? What scene? We don't need it. We don't need it. I said, I think you're underestimating Marion. I do think you need the scene. So they kind of hush-hush George and Stephen, they were kind of like, oh, well, okay. And George said, I'll go shoot the scene. I'll shoot a second unit in San Francisco. So he got the actors, and did it in front of one of the federal buildings downtown San Francisco. Because I said, you can't leave Marion tied to the stick.
I mean, there's a love story. You got to kind of wrap it up,
Yeah, exactly.
And the fact that they didn't know, and she had to. I just think that's so symbolic of your tremendous influence on a very significant period in film history. So
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
So I think we should open up to questions.
Okay.
Questions?
We're bringing a mic for you.
I hope I'll have an answer.
Hello, thank you for coming out and talking about this great movie. I have a very, very specific question about the final shot, how it includes, like, just before it cuts to credits, the kind of whip, like, zoom out. That's one moment of this movie that I always think about, and it's some, again, like the power of editing. That was probably maybe, I'm curious, kind of the background of why that was included. I'm sure, like moments like those are often just, we cut and we zoomed the lens out, and then once you kind of watch it, you're like, whoa, that's cool. So I'm curious if you can kind of talk about that specific moment, and again, maybe it kind of connects to what you were talking about earlier, how in a lot of the filming Scorsese's movie, the camera a lot, and there's a lot of kinetic movement. So I wonder, if you can talk about that specific end shot.
I honestly don't remember.
Gotcha.
I honestly have no idea. I remember the shot. I remember the signs. Marty loved the location. I remember Marty telling me he loved the location because there's all those signs that they're walking it. And yeah, and she has to hug the boy. And it's a kind of an abrupt ending, but it works because you have to resolve her relationship with the boy, with her son, after you sort of resolve the relationship she has with the Christopherson character.
And that last line, "I can't breathe," that was
I
that
can't
was
breathe.
improv. That was
Yeah.
improv. And
Yeah.
the Monterey sign at the end,
Yes.
that was a pure accident.
Yes, that was an accident.
Had
yeah.
nothing to do with Monterey in the story. And he said, let's keep it.
Yeah, let's keep it.
More questions? Yes.
So when you first sit down to edit a picture, you haven't seen a frame of film. What do you think is the first thing that you know you're gonna go for when you're editing a film? What's the thing that gets the ball rolling for you?
Well, you know, I'm a total analog girl. And movies are shot out of sequence. So whatever scene you're starting working on could be scene 36, it could be scene 70, it could be scene 2. You know where you're going to be cutting out or cutting in and when you're cutting the scene together. And because I was analog, I had every cut of every scene, every take, every close-up, every two-shot, every establishing shot, every dolly, if there was a dolly. I had all those shots lined up on my bench. So when I sit down to edit the scene, I sort of have an idea where I want to start. I either want to start because there's some fabulous close-up that would make a great cut or a great piece of visual that's very powerful to start the scene. A lot of people at some point you need an establishing shot, you know, to work with. So like sometimes you just start looking for your opening shot. And that's where I start. I start with, well, how am I going to cut into this scene? What am I going to cut to? And why am I going to cut to that? And then, of course, part of the reason, because the first cuts are so long, is because you haven't made the transitions between scene 2 and scene 3, because they were cut out of, so totally out of sync with the structure of the film. Does that make any sense? And I've worked with a director who has had a digital editing thing, and we had an assistant doing a lot of the work on the computers, and we were making recuts. And I thought to myself, I can't stand this. I'm going to go crazy. It's taken him 10 years to find an alternate close-up for this performance. And sure enough, it took him 10 minutes to pull it out. Well, what director's cut was that in? Was that in the director's cut number 6? Was that in director's cut number... It's in the dailies. Just go back to the dailies. I mean, I would have pulled those close-ups off my bench. I'd have run the shots. I'd have found the performance I liked. I'd have marked it, and I'd have cut it in, and I'd have been done. I'd have been done in 5 minutes, you know? But waiting and waiting. See, the digital world doesn't make you have a lot of commitment, because whatever you do, you can change it. And whatever you do is going to remain in the computer. So you can always say, well, remember that cut we made a month ago that we kind of liked? You can go back and say, oh, there it is, right there. There's the cut of the scene we made. Because when I was working, if we had a cut we liked, but we had some experimental things to do, we would make a black and white dupe. We'd have to send it to the lab and get a 35mm black and white dupe of the scene so that we would have a record of what we'd done. But now editors don't have that. How many people in this room are editors? Oh, a lot of you. And you're all digital, I bet.
Well, the other thing about analog editing is you had to really think before you acted, because the repercussions of a splice, you know, so there was editors that I know that started off in analog and went to digital are grateful for the discipline they had in being able to think before you act.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I heard nightmare stories that I don't know if they're true or not, but because of the digital thing and because studios like to tell directors how to cut their films, make them shorter, you know, we want shorter films, we want this, and the studios get very involved in a lot of the post-production. And I've heard that there are studio executives who've made copies, digital copies of the dailies, and who are editing the movie in the studio at the same time the director is working with his editor.
Yeah, you didn't have that. You had so much more control within in the cutting room. I know.
I mean, those were horror stories for filmmakers. Yeah.
So we have time for one more question.
Hi there. Over here.
Oh, there you are.
So amazingly, I'd never seen this film, although I was aware of it. I've been aware of it for years. And now that I finally got to see it on the big screen, I can't help but see a thematic similarity between, in tone, of Bogdanovich's Last American Picture Show and Raffleson's 5 Easy Pieces. So when I look at Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, I feel the influence of Five Easy Pieces, and I hate to be trite, but the main character in Alice, there's a lot of Annie Hall in that piano scene. I think Woody Allen might owe something of Annie Hall to that character. But my question is, how aware was Scorsese's of 5 Easy Pieces? I feel like there's a whole lot of homage going on in the diner scene, and I may be wrong, but it's almost like I see these movies like as a trilogy, like an Americana trilogy.
Well, when did that film come out in relationship to him shooting Alice? What year was it?
Well, 5 Easy Pieces would be 1970.
And when was Alice?
I don't know.
74.
It was 74. Well, I think there is a saying just in life in general, is you're only as good as who you can steal from.
Right.
So if you get inspiration from another filmmaker or another editor or another actor or actress, it only makes sense that when you're doing your job, you want to use what's the best of the best that you've seen that has stayed with you. There's been, you know, something that really worked that you got in your head, and you thought, that's a good idea for this or that or the other thing. But yeah, everybody borrows from everybody. They do. In good ways, in good ways, in very good ways.
Thank you all so much for coming. And
Thank you.
Wow, what a treat to see that interview.